Welcome punters to this week's edition of the Melbourne Pro Punters panel. As you'll no doubt have noted already, we've had a change of the batting order today. I'm the host and I want to welcome my special guest, Anthony Jupp.
Hello, Pops.
Welcome to the show, Juppy.
Thanks for having me. Finally.
So the reason we've done this is keen watchers will know we did one a while back with Dan Kelly, where we went through Dan's history and racing and betting and everything else, and I can tell the punters out there is no more interesting and keen punter than Anthony Jupp, and I thought it was a great idea to get Juppy on and go back and find out where his journey started, what got him interested in betting in the first place and all that. So we're going to cover that in a minute, but first, Juppy, we normally start with some sort of funny. What do you got for us today?
Well, we'll go right back to the beginning, Pods. January 24th, 1980, Royal Women's Hospital, Carlton, Victoria. Doctors on the ward knew something special had happened that day, Pods. I'd finally arrived, and I was born in the greatest place on earth, in Carlton. So my uncle might have just finished with Carlton by that stage, and being born in Carlton, like by all men, Tony Southcombe. He's got the pub up there in Bendigo, and with my old man being a Carlton supporter and being born there, I didn't have much of a choice, spot. So that was the very beginning of it. And then I was actually thinking about this last night, and I actually had to make a couple of phone calls, because if we go back to the beginning, the first experience I ever had with the races was Tony actually had a trotter called Earl's Folly, and I was about 4, I reckon, and going to Moonee Valley on a Friday night with, on a Saturday night, of course, with the family, and just remembering how much fun that was, and watching it all go off when he won there at Moonee Valley on a Saturday night. Because let's face it, back in those days in the early 80s, like if you were winning at Moonee Valley on a Saturday night, it was a big deal. So that was probably one of my earliest memories. That, and along with being sort of, Dad was always in the sport anyway, more sort of following it and whatnot. I remember watching the old World of Sport every Sunday morning, and of course that not only did it have the footy panel and all that, but it also had Bill Collins would come on, and there'd be the review of the races from the day before, and especially like the daily double legs and whatnot. And then there'd also be, if there was a feature race at the trots, they'd normally show that. So that was probably one of the earliest memories I've got. That, and I distinctly remember Kingston Town's third Cox plate win. I remember that being a really big deal at the time for essentially like a kid not far out of short pants. So
well, I'm guessing that probably would have been 1984, Juppy.
Yeah, about 84 would have been about 4.
So you were born in 1980?
Yeah.
Wow, you're making me feel old, Juppy.
Well,
and you remember stuff when you're 4. That's well done, well played. Like you've obviously a child protege there, remembering stuff from.
It's funny. It's just little bits and bobs like that stick in that made a big impression. So, yeah, growing up in Melbourne as a kid, of course, everyone was sort of following sport, and as a young lad, I spent a lot of time with my dad. When I was born, Dad had a pig farm, and that sort of evolved from a pig farm into the rubbish business, the waste management company that the family still have today. So as a kid, I spent, like, when I wasn't at school, or even when I was probably supposed to be at school, there were plenty of times I spent out on the truck working with Dad. And if there was one skill that I really picked up off him, both from in the early years going to the sale yards and whatnot and buying pigs and cattle and whatnot, and also just through the industry, was learning sort of how to develop your eye for what was perceived value. It was one of the more interesting things was when I must have been in about my late teens. I remember going to the machinery auctions, the truck auctions, which if they want to be relatives, the Jupps used to have the auctions down here, but I think it was Fowles we went to, and I remember there was this clapped out old rubbish truck, and the old man managed to buy it for about $4,000, I think. And I remember sitting in the car coming home just going, "What, Pop, what have you done this for, mate? Like, it's an absolute heap of shit." I said, "I can't believe you've done this." He goes, "Mate, you'll see." He pulled the rubbish part, the compactor, off the back. He sold the cabin and chassis of the old truck to the wreckers for $5,000, so he'd already made $1,000 out of the deal, and he's essentially got this free compactor, which the company still has, and it's now on its third or fourth truck underneath it now that it's worn out. So it was just little things like that it just spending a lot of time with him as a kid, that really helped sort of develop my eye for value. And I wouldn't say Dad was a keen punter. He was one of the shrewdest punters I ever came across. And I was on the receiving end of that a few times when I started SPing in my late teens and early 20s. There was a couple of big strip outs, and a couple of times they were courtesy of the old man. But what he'd do is he was very patient. He might only have a bet every 3 or 4 months, but when he found one that he liked and ticked a few of the boxes, it was like a small bet was sort of a month each way, and a big bet was $1,000 or $2,000 each way.
It's a really good way to bet if you've got the natural inclination to be that patient and not worry about missing a few along the way. Yeah,
and that was sort of him. Like it never sort of worried him, and often, like this time of year was always a good one. He was always looking for something at this time of year to get the Christmas turkey. So he was always looking for anything that could be a bargain or whatnot.
Well, I think I've met a few guys like that along the way over the years, and that just, I'm not sure what the right way to put it, but that are very good at not giving their money away.
Yeah.
And being very hard to get anything out of them. And it's a great skill.
Yeah.
If you're very tight with your money and you've got a high threshold for making decisions, that can be a really effective tool. Now we'll get to a bit later, because now you see your threshold for betting seems to be a little bit lower than your dad's. Maybe like you stagger your bets appropriately, so the big bets have been.
Well, I probably turn over more in a year than he does, but did. So then there was sort of some other sort of outside family interests. My sisters got married, and one of them, but they both live up around Horsham, and one of their husbands was always mucked around with a few greyhounds.
Right.
So I had a bit of an interest there. And then as I was sort of I started really getting keen probably towards the end of primary school. I can remember getting up each morning, and if my old man loved to drink. So there was either two options. Either Dad had already left to go on the truck, so the newspaper was there ready to be read, or the old man was still asleep and wasn't probably starting work till 9 o'clock because he had a skinful the night before. So I always got the opportunity to read the paper at home, and you flick through and go through, and I'd always look at the fields and what had happened the day before and whatnot. So that sort of piqued my interest towards the end of primary school. And where I sort of grew up, I grew up in small suburb on the outskirts of Melbourne called Research, which is, for the people who live in Melbourne, if you're say going from here to Yarra Glen races, you pretty much go through that on the old way, unless you went out through Lilydale. So where I went to high school at Eltham College, basically the school's sort of the divide. If you're on the bottom side of the school where I grew up, it's all sort of built up housing. But if you go on the other side of the school, it opens up into the paddocks, and a lot of them are now got vineyards in them, and then you head out into the Yarra Valley. So essentially where I grew up was halfway between going to the city tracks and Yarra Valley. And my late grandmother, she loved the trots. So often on a Saturday afternoon, I'd go around to her house, and then we'd nap out and have a few bets at Moonee Valley on a Saturday night. And then if it was a Saturday, or they didn't have Sunday racing back then, but if it was school holidays or something, there was a harness meeting at Yarra Valley, she'd always take me out there. And even at the harness meetings, I can remember going out there. I can remember going, I think, was it 89 June won the cup? Or was it later than that? Or was it 94?
It was in the 90s, but I'm not sure.
I can remember.
I think 94 is right.
Yeah, I can remember going out to the Yarra Glen Trots on Melbourne Cup Day the year Jern won it, and there was 20 bookies there. And I remember spending the whole day in the ring. My grandmother had her sister over from Holland, and they were just sitting there talking all day, so they didn't worry about what I did. And I just remember being out there and how vibrant it was, and I think that meeting's still the highest attended harness meeting of the year. They still get a big crowd there because it's sort of anyone who lives in those outer suburbs can get to there, if they're not going to Flemington and didn't want to battle the crowd. So,
all right, Jumpy. So you've touched on a whole bunch of things there. So you've talked about the Jern one, but what's your earliest memory of a Melbourne Cup? What's the first one that you really vividly remember?
The first one I vividly remember was, I'm trying to think back, I think it was either 87 or 88. And I went to a family barbecue up the road and they had a cup sweep. And I can't remember whether it was at Tallack or it might have been the year before, but I won $10.
Right.
And that was a fortune at the time for a kid who was 8. And I remember then the following weekend going over to the shopping centre at Greensboro with the $10 and buying a whole heap of Matchbox cars and just thinking, how easy is this?
The first experience in punting is it's a future shaper.
Especially if you win.
Yeah.
So that was the first sort of one from there, and then I rolled on through high school, and as everyone can see, I'm not a small lad. You'd rather feed me for a day than a week. So I was always sort of a big kid growing up, and luckily the balls dropped fairly early. So that was at the stage where Dad had a phone account, and I think in about the 4 or 5 years that I was under 18 that I used it, I reckon there was only one operator that ever asked me if I was 18 or not. And I couldn't convince her that I was born in 1936, which was when the old man was born. So I hung up, called back 3 minutes later and got a different operator and I was away. So I can remember at high school, this was sort of pre-mobile phones, we had a public phone next to the tuck shop, which was, let's face it, there was probably 2 joints you were going to find me.
So this use of your dad's phone account, was that with his knowledge or without?
Bit of both.
Bit of both?
Well, by that stage he was giving me a little bit for working on the truck and I just said, well, you know where to put that.
Right, okay.
So that went in there. It was quite funny. The old man was getting on a bit by that stage. He would have been in his, when I was at high school, he would have been in his mid to late 50s. So if it was raining or if it was stinking hot, he'd wait for me to get home from school and then take me out on the truck so he could sit in it and just drive around and I'd have to get out and do the rest. So he wasn't silly. But he'd give me a little bit of a sling for that and that'd go in there, and I can remember always making sure that I had a couple of coins to go to school with to ring the tab at lunchtime to put.
That's outstanding, Johnny.
To put, and the real trick was the transistor radio.
Yeah.
And we had blazers or a jumper, and I always wore a jumper and no one ever knew why. The thing with the jumper was if you leant on the desk like this, you could run the earpiece up your arm and put it in there, and all you did was when you drop it down, it went back up your arm, so the teacher never caught you listening to the races while you were sitting in class.
Oh, that's fair.
So I was sort of keen on that, and then running a book at school, and then...
let's not go too far. So when was it, in that period, so you're using the phone account, you've got the transistor at school, what's the first big result you remember having?
There weren't too many big results then. Like it was sort of the typical mug education. It was like backing a lot of favourites, trying to find, especially during the winter months, I can remember you try and find the wet trackers to win on a wet track.
So you don't remember having a decent result in that?
No, not at those stages. I can also remember...
when's the first time you remember? It must be one somewhere on the line, even in your 20s or whatever.
The first really big result I can remember came on the tennis. I think it must have been the early 2000s, and I backed Jennifer Capriati at 66s to win the Oz Open, and after she came back from her being in jail and all sorts of things, so I remember backing her and her lobbing, and that was a big result. But there'd been some ups and downs in between now and then. But I can also remember, probably in my early to mid-teens, like you couldn't watch the races anywhere in those days apart from either being in a tab or a pub, apart from Channel 31, which used to show the trots on a Saturday night down here, which was a community-based thing, and like that's still missed. That, like a lot of guys my age would have grown up watching that, and Wide World of Sports would show the daily double legs. But I can remember if the old man was coming back through in the truck, I'd get him to let me out in Eltham, which is the next town down, which had the tab, and Nigel Pearson, who had the Eltham tab at that stage, he's kicked on. He's now got the one at Crown. He's got another 2 in the city and one at Footscray. He's kicked on probably more than I have. I just funded the Empire to begin with. I used to get Dad to drop me off there, and I'd literally just sit there and watch race after race. I can remember going there on a Monday, and the only meeting in Victoria being Maryborough Trots, and I'd just sit there watching race after race, and just sort of learning from that, and then getting the bus home.
I wonder how long it'll be before there are no tab agencies.
I think...
So they'll always be in pubs and clubs, I think.
Yeah.
But the actual agencies, it must be very marginal, I would think.
Yeah, it's... Unless you've got... I know there's a couple of... The one in Box Hill I think is very good because they've got a big Asian population out there, but like... As you know, possibly we'll get on to later, I spent a fair bit of time in Bendigo. There's one actual standalone out there in Mitchell Street, and like I'd love to get my hands on it, but it's it'd be tough without having the pub.
So that's a good education that you've had there through all sorts of.
There's another big result. That was when I was still at high school. I was 17, and it's probably the greatest win I've ever seen. Is we all caught the train. I reckon we got there for the dawn service. It was before wristbands and all this stuff. And I remember having absolutely everything on might and power to win the Caulfield Cup. We caught the train to Caulfield because the week before I went to Caulfield and had to walk home because I ran out of money. Didn't buy a daily ticket. I only bought a 2 hour. So that they were something like it was about a 4 hour walk home. But it was those sort of things that. Well,
you probably remember better than me, Juppy, but my memory is that Mike Power was pretty good odds that day. He might have even been close to double figures, I think, because I remember Marble Halls started favourite, so Mike Power definitely wasn't favourite.
Well, I know that I'd been working, so I had 2 or 300, which at that stage was probably my type honey bank. I remember going there with one of my best mates, Jimmy, James Stockdale. He went on to do a bit of bookmaking and whatnot. I remember him taking his dad's Canon camera to cash converters the day before and hocking the camera to get the money to back it. And we went there and we had a heap. I could drink at that stage. I could. That's because I was a young bloke. And I just remember just having a heap of drink and coming home with more money than I can ever remember. So it was as towards the end of high school, that was the big one.
Well, that was the one I was looking for. So there it is. There's the
but also just. Also, the other thing that sticks in my mind was just how painless it was. Like we were up in the stand where the bookies are, where the small sort of bookies ring is now, up where blokes like Walshy and Doltz and that used to be. I can remember watching it up there and watching him come around the home turn, and we were just high-fiving at that stage. There's no way he's going to get beat. And then that flows on to another funny story.
To this day, it's one of the most remarkable wins. It's right up there with what we just saw recently from Winks in the Cox Plate. That Caulfield Cup, for those young viewers that haven't seen it, it's worth going back and having a look at. Like it's just very rarely you see horses win a big race like that, particularly a handicap like that. It's an amazing bit of footage to watch.
So we had the bank after there. I don't know what we did Cox Plate Day. I remember going to Derby Day because I reckon that was the year that Antiquity won they called it the Shivers Regal at that stage. It's I don't know whether it's a 2 or 3 year old race, the shorter race on Derby Day. And I remember him winning that. We had a good result there. And then my first real taste of like on sort of semi on course bookmaking, other than just SPN to blokes that have given the bets or ring you or whatnot, was there was another different family barbecue up the road, and they sort of knew that I had an interest, and they said, "Do you want to come up and run the book on the cup for us?" I said, "Oh, all right." So diligently sort of wrote out a book and wrote out a heap of cards.
What year?
It was the Might and Power year.
All right.
Because I said to the old man, I said, like, I've got a couple of hundred in the phone account and I burnt the rest. And he, when he was emptying the rubbish bins, you'd have a little biscuit tin that you'd put the money in. So he gave me the tin from the day before and he goes, "Well, here's your start, see what happens." So we went up there because he sort of wanted to make sure he had enough, because there were some guys that might have wanted to have 50 or 100 on something. So James and I went up there and we're working away, and it was the first time James had ever penciled. It's the first time I'd ever sort of done it, and the only thing we knew was that Doremus was not going to be a good result. And with about 4 minutes to go, I rang the tabard back to Might and Power, and then as I've said to James, said that was probably a bad idea. I probably should have actually backed Doremus rather than just backing this thing. He goes, oh well, if it goes around like it did at Caulfield, we'll just win here and it won't matter. Well, I had everything packed up and was ready to run when Gregory Michael Hall waved the whip going past the post, and I looked at Jimmy and said, I don't think we can pay here, I don't think we've got enough. And then the next thing you know, Might and Power's number went up in the frame, and I remember I had an ex-Army Falcon Ute, an XE, that was worth about $400, and I went down to Autobahn the next day and put a $1,200 CD player in it with what I'd won the day before, and I actually had to get the insurance doubled on the Ute to actually just insure the CD player. The CD player was worth more than the Ute. So that was sort of right at the end of towards the end of high school then, and then after that I went on to uni.
I can remember being at the races that day. It was one of the most dramatic Melbourne Cup betting events I can't remember at what point it was. I think it was before, or it might have been soon as the previous race was run. At that stage, Might and Power was still close to $7, I think. It was either 5 to 1 or 6 to 1. It was one of those, and no one really knew where it was coming from, but it was into 7 to 2 very quickly. And
well, it was 7 to 2 from the get-go where I was, because I was keeping it.
I don't remember what price Doremus was, but I can tell the punters out there that I had a really big result on that race that year, because I just took the same trifecta as the Caulfield Cup, which was Might and Power, Doremus, and the horse that finished third in the Caulfield Cup wasn't there. The horse that finished fourth was Marku.
Oh, okay, yeah.
If I remember the name correctly. Anyway, he ran third in the Melbourne Cup, and if the photo went the other way, I would have had a very small result, but that photo going the other way was a big result. And I do remember clearly what you were talking about, that Greg Hall saluting and the jockeys going around the back when whoever was, probably Johnny Letts at that stage, interviewing him on the horse. There was at least a 45-second period, might have been a minute, might have been longer than a minute,
it felt like
where everyone thought Doremus had won. There was no, and then all of a sudden they had the slow-mo up, and everyone goes, oh, hang on a minute. And then they put the actual finish lengths photo up, and I just remember going mad, so I'm sure you probably did the same. Same thing.
That's what teaches you about the game. It's trying to sweat those things out.
Great story.
So then,
so what I want to know, Jumpy, so you've had that experience as a young lad. So at what point did you make your way into the corporate world, working directly in the industry? I might be jumping ahead then. So what was your path getting into there? Did you work for on-course bookmakers first? How did it all happen?
So I finished high school. I then got accepted, like my grades weren't anything particularly flash, mainly because I didn't try that hard because I was watching races and doing all that. I got accepted into Advanced Diploma of Agricultural Services at the University of Melbourne, based out of Longerenong, which is just out of Horsham. So I moved up there, and that meant that there's bugger all else to do in Horsham, so every Tuesday night I'd go to the dogs, and if there was a harness meeting, you'd try and get along to that, and just sort of betting along there. Did that, got offered a cadetship with Elders, and at the same time Frank Costa, who was the president of the Geelong Footy Club, he's got a big fruit and vegetable, they were supplying all the fruit and veggies to Coles at that stage, and they were sort of looking for workers, and I thought, well, I can either go and get 45 grand a year working for Elders, or I can go and get, if you work Sundays, I was getting taking home $1,200 or $1,300 working in the fruit warehouse. So I moved back down from then, and that was about the same time that my youngest brother Billy would have been a kinder. And one of the girls he went to kinder with, turned out, was Darren Gillum, who's an on-course bookie. And Mum sort of mentioned to the Gillums that I was really into it. And
I've never met any of the Gillums, but I've got friends that know them, and I hear nothing but great things about that family.
Well, so Darren said, right, so the first meeting I ever worked was Emirates Stakes Day at Balnarring in 99. And I turned up there in a full suit and was completely out of place. But that was sort of at the stage where bookmaking was still, like I can remember. So I worked the rest of that, a couple more meetings for Darren, and then I got a job with Craig Allardyce, who was, I wouldn't say he was easy to work for, but he taught me a lot. Like, he hardened me up a lot. He sacked me 3 times, which was interesting. He sacked me one day at...
So he sacked you 3 times. How many times did he hire?
2.
So the last one was final.
the last one was it. No, he jumped down off the stand, because this was in the old days of still the... Like, I was on the bag, because it turned out after one meeting everyone realised I couldn't pencil. But I was quite good on the bag, so I remember, because at that stage all the rings at the picnics were just dirt. Like, they were just... You had wooden poles coming out of the ground, you'd strap the wooden board to it, you'd book and the bag and stool and the cards, and that was about it. So I remember him jumping down, and he must have been losing, and he marked with an X. He goes, I want you to stand on this X. He goes, if I see you move from here, that's it. And I must have turned around to talk to someone, I was off the X, so he sacked me. so that was good. That was sort of the experience. That's when I sort of started. And then at that stage I was also working for Costas and for Sulo, and Costas was really good because there was quite a few boys there that were sort of into the punt. One of the blokes, Eamon Burke, owned a really good dog called Billy the Duck that won about 700,000 in prize money. It was a really, really... I might not have been that much, might have only been say 300. But I know it won a Perth Cup, it won numerous races in Melbourne. He was a group standard dog. So he sort of had them, and we were always sort of talking about punting or footy and whatnot. And then I was working at the races on the Saturdays when the picnic season was on. And then I ran out of points on my licence and did my brief. So it shows how fat it was working at the free market. I could actually afford to get... I was living in North Fitzroy. I could afford to get a cab from there to Laverton and back each day and still make money out of it.
Right.
And like still live. So I did that. But once I got my licence back, I then upgraded and went and got my truck licence. And then came back and started working for Mum and Dad, driving one of the trucks there. And that sort of would have been early 2000s maybe, or 2003, 2004. That's when I met my now wife Lara, and we got married in 2005. I was 25, she was 23. And there was a funny story leading up to before we got engaged. By this stage, I'd sort of gone through the losing period. I was SPing during that time too, and I got stripped by, it turns out they were bowling for someone and they were connected to some unsavoury characters who threatened to do bad things to me. But I knocked off 15 grand, which I didn't have, so I had to borrow the 15 grand and basically worked it off. And at that stage, that sort of really gave me the resolve to say, no, I can't let this beat me. And I
think that's before we go past, it's a really important point for all the viewers out there. There comes a point in every person that's successful in this game that survives in it, where they just make the decision, I'm no longer going to allow myself
to lose,
to be an easy target. I'm going to be hard as nails. And I can point to a few things for myself, and nearly everyone I've spoken that's survived a long period of time can point to a particular point in time where they made that decision. So
so I got sick of losing, and between working and punting, I managed to, in about 9 months, I repaid the 15 grand, and then built myself up a little bit of a bank. I was betting on all sorts of things like I still do now. But I remember at that stage, it was the very early infancy of the internet, and I had one of the few accounts that you could have at that stage was still the tabs. So I remember having a Victorian one, a New South Wales one, because I think I got the New South Wales one when Lara and I got engaged. We got engaged in Sydney. But that was still the best website, gaming website I can ever remember, was that original Victorian tab one.
Right.
And when the merger happened, well, it wasn't a merger, they essentially, Tabcorp took over the Victorian tab, and they brought the shitty New South Wales one in. But I remember having, it must have been 4 or 5 grand or something in my phone account, which at the time was a heap. but I was saving it there to buy an engagement ring for Lara. And I don't know how or why, but Lara, for some unknown reason, because basically all you had to do was hit redial on the phone at home, and she'd heard me read out the number often enough that she knew what the code was. So she rang up, and all of a sudden there's $4,500 in there. Well, I rock home from driving the truck. Here's Lara just in tears. I go, what's wrong? She goes, where are you pissing off to? I go, I'm not pissing off anywhere. She goes, well, why have you got $4,500 in your tab account and no one's told me about this and you're just saving up because you're going to piss off at me? So I was actually saving up to buy an engagement ring. So then she wipes away the tears. She goes, well, right then, we'll go into the jewellers. I go, well, if that's the case, we better go past the tab first. We better go and see Nigel and get the money. She thought I was pissing off, but I'd actually just been sort of squirreling it away to buy an engagement ring. So at that stage, I was still clerking, and then we got married, and it was probably 2 or 3 years after that. I actually went initially for a job at IAS. I put in for it, and I think by that stage I'd done 8 years of on-course stuff. And they came back and said I didn't have enough experience. So I thought, oh, well, what do I need to do to get experience? And one of my other best mates from high school, he probably 4 months before that had just moved to England. He'd moved to London. He's a chartered accountant, so he had a gig over there. And I thought, well, if I'm ever going to get sort of corporate experience, I'm going to have to probably go over there. So I said, Lara, what do you think? And we sort of had the option where we could have bought the little unit we were living in or go overseas. So we took a chance. We literally knew 2 people over in London, and at that stage the Aussie dollar was buying about 40 pence, so it was a big financial hit. But yeah, we moved to London in late 06 or 07, and got to London. Of course, not having that much money, needed to get straight to work, so I was applying for jobs via the racing post in like the betting industry. But I remember the flat we were staying at, I remember seeing the garbos down the bottom empty in the bin, so I whistled out to them, oh, you boys, like, how do I get a gig doing this? They said, I'll go up to this mob in Hammersmith in West London, and they're the ones that supply all the labour for the council. So I went up there, and they gave me a job of all places at the cemetery, where I was sort of gardening and whatnot, and then the governor there loved me, so because I was sort of a hard worker and I was easy to get along with, and he enjoyed a bit too, and sort of I had to completely adapt what I was doing because I was used to doing the Australian stuff, so I had to throw myself headfirst into doing the English stuff. So every morning it was about a 20-minute bus ride from home to the cemetery, so I'd grab the racing post on the way. You'd sit there, you'd read through that, start doing the form, finish doing it at lunchtime, and it was the summertime when I logged there, so a lot of the racing in the summertime's in the evening. So I obviously tipped him a few winners. He looked after me, and then he moved me up the food chain a bit to where I was actually a grave digger for about 4 or 5 months. And one of the funniest instances when I was doing that was when we were digging the graves. I did a couple by hand, but most of them were just with the excavator. But you had to get down and put the boards in there to firm it up. But you couldn't bury the boards, so after the funeral had finished and you'd taken all the mats away and everyone had left, you then had to jump down and try and straddle the coffin and pull the boards out. You'd have to hit them out with a sledgehammer and throw them out. Well, there was this little Irishman, he was a Manchester United fan. They just buried him, and they must have made his coffin out of cardboard because I put my foot straight through the bottom of it, and no one's ever seen me move faster before or since. I flew up out of this hole. All these Englishmen are rolling on the floor laughing at me, thinking it's the funniest thing ever. And that was the quickest hole I ever filled in too. I didn't worry about the rest of the boards down there. I just got the excavator and filled it back in and got on with it. But while I was still there, I got a job with Sporting Index, just answering the phones.
Okay, so now we've got all the way through from Juppy's first memories of his punting up to when he's gone to England and got his first job in the corporate world. So that'll do us for part 1.